Hi, everybody, and welcome again and back for another week of Rinkside with your hosts, me, Ryan Steves, and my wonderful co-host, Emma. And Emma, this is a really fun topic this week and one that I'm happy to be getting your insights on. I think everyone will really enjoy it. So why don't you tell us, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, part of the reason that I wanted to even get into this podcast and use my voice in a way that could be helpful is talking about this topic. It's something that I think a lot of people from a young age to parents do not quite understand how to navigate around this, and even communication and all that. So we're going to dive right into kind of the difference between what it is like being a girl and a woman in sport versus a boy and man in sport. Something that is coming a lot more to light lately, with a lot of professional sports teams coming up with women's leagues. But it's something that growing up a bit in the spotlight has shown me so much about how different it is. And it's one of those things that I don't think anyone fully understands until you're in it. And we've learned a lot. And I want to talk just about it and normalize talking about it so that we can try to get past all these differences, or try to make them as few differences as we can eventually.
Yeah, I think we're so fortunate to have you leading this discussion. And it's a discussion, thankfully, that's happening more and more, I think, with the rise in cultural popularity, that is integrated popularity of some of the more predominant women's sports leagues now, professional sports leagues. It is changing and having a ripple effect all the way down to youth. And I think I encourage everyone listening, all our devoted Rinkside fans, to continue listening, to engage in this, because there are a lot of young, impressionable girls that are into sport, where it's nice and cozy at the young ages, where there's opportunity for everyone. And then I think even myself, having coached some young girls and watching how they interact with sport and how it's different. And I think we heard about this from Brendan Bell, our first ever Rinkside guest, who's now transitioned over and is coaching girls youth hockey. And he more joked about it, just how different it is, even to approach coaching with girls, and how much attention should be paid to coaching and developing young boys versus or how it's different to coaching and developing young women. So thanks for your honesty, and for championing this topic. So excited to hear from you.
The coaching piece is very interesting, because I think I've had some coaches over the years, mostly in soccer, because there's a lot more coaching turnover when I played soccer at a young age, who had come from coaching boys teams. And sometimes the delivery for all of us was way too abrupt. Mm-hmm. And it was one of those things where you're like, I feel like you've been coaching boys and you don't understand that you have to soften the delivery, especially for younger girls. Because I feel like when we're younger, especially as we're learning a sport, and we're hard on ourselves and we're perfectionists a lot of the time. When you're in sport, you become that way. Criticism is hard to receive, I think, a little bit more than for younger boys. So that was one of the biggest things that I noticed when I had a coach that was mainly just focused on coaching women versus a coach that had coached boys before. It was so different. So it was definitely interesting to hear Brendan's opinion on that in our first episode. Yeah. But that's just one element. The coaching piece, I do think that it is quite different between coaching boys and coaching girls, especially at that young age. Yes. But I think even where I wanted to, I'm going to just jump right into it. So almost my entire curling career, we've been somewhat in the spotlight from Canada Winter Games. So that was on TV. And Rachel and I have been, obviously, I've said this before, we've been curling together for forever, it's like almost our whole careers. I cannot remember a day where we didn't have people come up to us. And she did get more of this, but to say, you need to smile more. Why don't you smile more? You look like you're so upset on the ice. And that it starts to wear on you after a while, because I've never once heard someone tell that to a man who is competing at a sport. There are all sorts of athletes whose faces are in the spotlight, and I've never heard someone say, like, go up to the equivalent, any man in curling, and tell them they need to smile more. So it started to get to the point where our reaction to it was frustration. It was just like, why do you feel like you have to say that to us? We're playing a sport. We're on the ice, high intensity. We're focused. We're not thinking about how we look. We're thinking about what's our next move in order to win this game or to get this next shot or whatever that situation is when you're in a competitive state. So eventually we started saying, like, I don't think you understand that who we are here as a person off the ice is not the same person as we are in competition. But then, I definitely realized that the men were not getting those same comments. And so a couple of years ago, I saw a TikTok, and it was a woman at the gym do lifting, and she's like, when guys tell you to smile more, and she's doing all these lifts with like the biggest over dramatic smile on her face, and it looks ridiculous because no one goes to the gym and lifts with this massive smile on her face. It looked crazy. So we recreated it curling edition, just to kind of just raise awareness to this is how ridiculous you are when you're asking us to smile more while we're doing this sport. And I was telling my friend today that we were doing this podcast and about this topic. And she's like, it's so funny. I get stopped on the street while I'm walking, just walking to work or to cafe or whatever. And people have told me to smile more. And she's like, I don't even know you. Why are you saying that to me? So not even in sport, but it was funny that she said that.
Yeah. That's, you've talked to me a little bit about this topic with Rachel in particular. And it is stunning. But if you're an avid sports fan and you're consuming sports and you're watching the interview level sports, meaning the next day, these happen frequently, right? These types of questions, which if you're a sports fan and you're paying attention to both women and men's professional sports, the biggest example that I went back to, and it was so cringeworthy by everyone watching, didn't matter if you're a man or a woman, was back in 2015. I don't know if you remember this, Emma, when Eugenie Bouchard was playing at the Australian Open. And she wins her match, and she comes to as they often do. The reporter comes on the court and interviewed her and asked her to give a twirl to show the crowd her outfit, and that generated, this was 2015. Things that what's acceptable and what's expected are certainly shifting over time. So even not that long ago, there was outrage over that, and the same comment that I'm hearing you say, which is you would never have asked Roger Federer to give a twirl and show his new Nike shorts. Just unheard of. So
yeah, along that similar line, it was a few years. It was an event that was in early September. So coming back from a summer break, everyone's been out in the gym in the sun, and we played an event actually in Shanghai, and we were sent, and then there was a men's team that was sent as well. And I heard this podcast after, and it was a curling related podcast, and they kind of just debriefed what had happened in Shanghai. So we won that event, and so did the men's team that was there. The debrief was about how it looked like we had some fresh highlights and a nice tan. And the debrief about the men's team was how well they were playing, how well they were gelling. It seems like they haven't missed a beat since the spring. And the talk about our actual performance after having achieved the exact same accomplishment as the men's team that was there was a very minor, like couple seconds, but mostly talking about how we looked. And I thought that was so interesting, especially because the podcast, it was coming from women. So I think we should be trying to pump other women up in the same way that we would talk about these men. But you get that a lot. And that's the same as the Jeannie Bouchard situation, where it's talking about her appearance, what she's wearing, her outfit. And those are a lot of the same sort of comments, or with social media now, there's access. So the comments that are on the men's posts versus the women's posts, I would say predominantly more about appearance on women's posts. And then the men's posts, it's actually about their athletic abilities, skill level, accomplishments. And I don't know why it's like that, but it really is. And when with a bit of it, you're like, haha, funny.
Yeah.
But then as it keeps going on, you're like, is this just how it is? Is this just how it is for all girls in sport? And I could see how if you're a young girl and you're in the spotlight and the comments that you're seeing online are related to your appearance and not to your abilities, how that could take a toll on you and maybe discourage you from wanting to be in that spotlight anymore when you're like, well, if I have a day where I don't look good, are people going to say something? It's a weird world.
Yeah. I think this is important though for parents of young girls entering this world to understand, because you and I have talked about this, not in this context yet on the show, and I'm glad we're doing it. So I've looked into this, and I've got 2 young boys, so I know it's a different dynamic. But as a coach, I'm also prepared for this, because there are still young girls who still stay in predominantly boys sport, and before perhaps branching over into girls only. And so I looked up some figures, and it was fascinating. With the Tokyo Olympics, there was, I think the number was almost 90% of online abuse for athletes in the lead up to those Olympics was directed at women. So, even people taking to online forums to attack professional or amateur athletes was almost all directed towards women. And so, that's being studied, and I'm not sure what's being done with it. I know some bigger platforms have taken steps to really moderate and filter it out to make sure it's not at least getting to these athletes when they're reading stories about themselves. Mm-hmm. But obviously there's a heck of a lot more work to be done, because this is still very recently, and dramatic differences like that really doesn't make it too appealing for young women to enter that world, knowing that it's hard enough to be a high level athlete and succeed in your domain, but then to face that at a disproportionately way higher number than your male counterpart.
Yeah, I was gonna say, as a young girl in the sport, if you're just seeing your role models get ripped apart with comments or negative feedback online, or just unsolicited negative feedback, what is going to make that would cause some anxiety in putting yourself in that same situation. It's you build a tough skin, but it's really hard to have a tough enough skin knowing ahead of time you're diving into that world. And I think criticism online is never going to go away. People who can sit behind a phone or a computer and say something without the repercussions of having to get a comment back towards you to your face is always going to cause that. But the fact that those comments are often just unrelated to the sport itself is where I can get a little bit confused. And I'm not exactly sure how come the just gender bias has gone that way. But I think it's just overall perception, even as from kids from a young age. I was reading something online, and it just said that parents encourage their young boys to get into sport a lot more than their young girls. And there was a pretty big difference in that stat. Like it was like 20% higher to encourage their boys to get into sport. And I think that in itself, whether or not it's right, just shows that there is a difference between how we perceive men belonging in sport versus women. And so as young girls, if their peers aren't playing and they are playing, there's going to be a higher dropout rate, because the sacrifice you have to make as a young girl being in sport, I know, I was there, you miss out on a lot. You have to miss out on a lot of things that are going on in your friend group socially, because you have practice, or you're away for the weekend at a competition, or you have a game that night. You do make friends on your team, but it can cause a little bit of being left out of, especially if your teammates are at different schools and you're at your own school, you're missing out on activities within your peer group at your school. There is a lot of bullying that can go with that. So that does cause a higher dropout rate in those situations. I did feel that when I was younger, I felt that I had my team, both soccer and curling, and those became my closest friends. I had a few good friends in school that I always could rely on, and it didn't matter how much I was gone, and they would always be there for me. But I didn't have a huge group of friends because I was never there. I was always away. So that does make it hard for younger girls to get a good friend group and then feel comfortable enough and then not have that isolation when you do go back to school, or maybe next time there's an event you don't get invited because you weren't there before. So it does make it difficult.
Yeah, and you again, you and I have chatted a little bit about this. Anecdotally, the dropout rates and girls leaving sport happens much earlier and at a much higher rate than boys. The Canadian Women in Sport group does this study called the Rally Report, and so as we were chatting, I pulled it up, and 1 in 3 girls leaves the sport by late adolescence. 1 in 10 boys. It's pretty dramatic, and I think that's a real eye opener for parents of young girls who are still in those years where you can't imagine them wanting to leave the sport at that kind of rate. And so it's really surprising. There's many other studies and stories out there too of the positive impact sport plays for girls, of course, as it does with boys. One thing I found very fascinating, I was reading this and digging into a little bit for this discussion, and 80% of female Fortune 500 companies, CEOs reported that sports were a huge part of their lives growing up. So sort of somewhat independent perhaps of when they maybe left the sport, but the positive impact it plays on young girls when it comes to self-esteem, confidence, resilience, all these same characteristics and habits it instills in boys or girls. The strong connection between leadership positions and having had a positive experience and lasting experience with sport.
Aside from that too, even just the ability to organize your life at a young age, when in school and competing, doing all those things and succeeding at them takes a lot of learning and practice and all that. And I thought that a lot of my life skills that, such as like being organized and not missing a beat, not missing a deadline, being reliable, all of those things came from having to navigate both competing and being in school at the same time, missing exams, having to get them rescheduled. All of that, I think, plays a part in it too. Not that I'm a CEO, but I think that you learn a lot of skills from having been in sport at a young age and having to manage your life a little bit differently than other kids do who are just in school.
Of course, I did not grow up with some of the same experiences you had, Emma, and I can't relate, obviously, but the dropout rate is concerning for me as someone so involved in sport. We hate to see that. I know it's on the minds of many parents who have daughters in it. I think you just hope that there's a positive experience, that you stay in the sport in some form. For those watching on our YouTube, I'm wearing my Queens rugby T-shirt. My wonderful niece Lauren is a rugby player at Queens. Very proud of her. A little plug for Lauren. She listens. She loves listening to Emma and I. So I think that's what we all hope for, is that there's just such a positive experience with it. You can get through it in such a positive way that some of the more challenging aspects don't really come in to ruin it, frankly. Mm-hmm. I think one of the other challenges for young girls, apart from all these maybe more societal and cultural issues, are investment, right? There's just less investment as the ages start to go up. So there's less opportunity. We're talking about facilities. It's really difficult to schedule and book facilities. And so a lot of the bookings tend to go to boys programs and other programs. So, definitely a lack of investment, which I hope can be changed over the coming decade as we're seeing the positive sort of community reception for the PWHL. And I'm talking locally, and how much of an impact that's had on young girls in hockey in particular, but other sports that just now see the success and how the community's rallied around it and invested in it and is attending and supporting them.
Yeah, it is a vibe in there. Totally. In Ottawa, it is a vibe. People are pumped. It's so much fun. If you haven't been to a game, go. Awesome. The PWHL games are fantastic. So
yeah, and I went to the Battle on Bay Street. So this is an annual event Toronto plays. This year, I went in January with my family. They were playing New York, and it was a sold out. They played at the the Air Canada Center where the Leafs play. They played in the same building. It was packed. The vibe outside was as if there was a Leaf game. The energy in the building was incredible. My big takeaway, which was amazing, was the crowd was so much more supportive than a men's game, than a Leafs game. The energy in the building can be so negative when the Leafs play. And there's probably a million reasons for that. I think even I read something recently. Jana Hefford, who's a senior VP, a Hall of Famer, incredible hockey player herself, now is in charge of this and managing through in the expansion, saying, I don't think any of us expected the league to be where it is today when we started this fast. And, they're expanding now in Seattle and Vancouver, and they're just on this precipice of really ingraining the league and its athletes in the community and finding this long-term fan, not just this, I forget what they're called, like a casual fan that just pops in to check things out. They're seeing that there's really integrating into how people consume sports. This is now one of them.
Yeah, it's so great, because that was one of the biggest differences too, from a professional standpoint, knowing the NHL has this type of salary. And if you're one of the top women's hockey players, it's not even close to the same. So having a professional league is definitely the first step. I am so lucky to be in a sport that has had very equal opportunity from both a financial standpoint, a viewership standpoint, an access standpoint. But I think curling is unique in that way. And the financial aspect of it for pay, prize money, that sort of thing, that became equal in the last 10 years. That was not equal when I first got into we're not professional, we are an amateur sport, but there is a prize purse for the big events. That's how we kind of pay our season, but that was not equal. And there was some meetings and some players took a stand, and now it is. And so I'm really grateful that that's one other sport that's in that same direction, making those changes, making it so that let's encourage other young women to continue in the sport, knowing that you will get equal opportunity. And that's going to keep more girls playing, I hope.
Yeah. And I do think it comes back to this, when you hear the business people talk, they talk about revenue, return on investment, which is such an odd way. You don't hear about those same things, obviously, in the equivalent sport leagues. But that's starting to change, where investors are now looking at women's professional sports leagues, at least, through a different lens. And I think the one comparison that I heard was a lot of these big investors, the kinds that help prop up some leagues, men's and women's, are like tech startups, high growth potential, not a saturated market, right? And I think that's what they've seen with the PWHL, just how the appetite for it was there. It was the right timing. You can go to the WNBA and look at the effect that Caitlin Clark had, Angel Reese, Paige Bucker's coming in. These are athletes now that have crossed over from just being women athletes to cultural phenomenons that have their own following and are impacting a whole entire following differently than ever before. And so you're seeing actually more investment come into these leagues, which then allows them to up pay. And I think that's that. And I don't know if this is something you followed, Emma. It's something that I've been following, where, pay disparity in the WNBA is staggering. You have Caitlin Clark coming in. This was the big number, making something like $75,000 as a first overall pick, compared to maybe $10 million in the NBA for her counterpart. And so, how do we get those numbers up? How do those numbers go up? Right? Well, through investment, through growth, through supporting these leagues the way they should be supported. Big TV deals. We're starting to see more viewership investment because people want to watch it. That's a really good sign. So when the big networks start to invest, that's better, because I know all of your big events we can watch on TV, which probably helps to the equal pay issue. So I think it's starting to happen too with some of the other big sports.
Yeah, and curling, we're lucky. Like, the interest in women's curling is equal to the interest and the viewership of the men. So it is like a different type of game in a way. It's still curling, but I think women's curling, just with the difference in strength, and it's impossible. We played against men's team. We played against the men's team recently. And from like a shot making perspective, I think the skill set is very similar. There is no comparison on sweeping. It's a physical difference that can never be the same. And I think that's one of those things too, that just the way that we're all built, it's impossible. So we had a tough go with that game, but it was super fun.
And that's coming from one of the best sweepers in curling history. So that's big praise for her.
It's funny. We thought we played in a men's event. I think it was 6 or 7 years ago. We got invited. We were having a good season, and it was a different type of event where there weren't points on the line. So they felt that they could bring us in and they weren't taking points away from a men's team. We thought that the sweeping was close. And so there's some guys that are physically quite big. Like they weigh way more than we do. They're taller. And we're like, there's just no chance. We know they would be better than us. But then there were some of the smaller guys that were like, oh, we'd be the same as them though. Like they're innocent. Like I'm tall. I'm 5'9". I was like, it should be close. And then we played our first game. We were like, it's not close. It's not even kind of close. Like we were very misinformed, or we very much judged this incorrectly. But I think it's one of those things that our finesse has to be even that much better. We have to be that much more precise because we have sweeping, but we can't save a shot like the men can. So we work harder. We work harder just to try to make up that difference as much as we can.
I don't know. If Rachel was here, she'd probably disagree with the fact that you can't save shots. Actually, you save tons of shots.
Yeah.
One other thing I wanted your views on, Emma, is representation of women now at the, in some of these professional, even national sports organizations. Seeing increased representation by women, not only at the coaching levels in some of our national sports programs, but on boards, chairs of some of these boards, all the way up to now PWHL, WNBA, and now we talked to Corey Murphy, and we're now starting to see representation even at the skills development side in sports like the NHL. So. I think that's another important contributing factor. Sorry, it was just a note I made when we were talking about that. I wanted to come back to get your views because when you look at the PWHL, and I just did a quick scan, it hovers somewhere. And for roles from GM to head coaches, assistant coaches, skills coaches, video coaches, it hovers probably around 40%, according to my rough math, of a representation from women. But importantly, women in at least one GM role. Head coaches, these are important, they're all important coaches, but positions of authority, decision-making positions, which is really good to see. I've no doubt it's going to increase, but, I think too, maybe with your experience with Curling Canada, I know it's happening in other of our national sports programs to see more women being put in these positions and more women putting their hands up because it's a more, enticing, safe environment for them. So I don't know if you've put much thought to that or experienced that yourself.
I do think it is changing. I think that the probably hesitancy, if not even wanting to apply for those jobs, is what the outside world is going to say as soon as there is something to criticize. I think that a lot of those roles are you get a lot of criticism to begin with. And then as a woman in those positions, that's going to be there's going to be way more emphasis on that criticism. So a tough skin would be really important to start. But I think that seeing these women go into these roles and show that it doesn't matter if I I know a lot about like I played in women's versus men's. It's still the same sport, and being able to study it and be able to coach players should not matter if you're the same gender as those players. I was coached a lot of my career by men who did not play women's curling or women's soccer, and they are viewed to be able to do that job properly. So I think it can go both ways. It is nice to see. It's nice to see. And I think that it's a different perspective too, to have a woman come in, fresh set of eyes on these teams, and be able to, give feedback, and you're going to see things differently. Like, I think everyone can agree that women and men can see things differently and pick up on different things. So having a well-rounded coaching staff like that is only going to help the team.
Yeah, and leadership too. I mean, you know, one of the big recent ones was Catherine Henderson at President and CEO of Hockey Canada, and I know you probably know her from she had spent a long time at Curling Canada, leading up to Curling Canada, and I think was known for pushing pay equity too. That was a big accomplishment of hers. And you know, when she joined Hockey Canada, I think it was seen as I'm sure we should get Catherine on and speak to her. We'd love to have her on. So if you're listening, Catherine, you're always welcome to ask her about what that transition is like. Because, you know, again, if hockey is supposedly this male-dominated sport, to bring someone in like Cathy to really have a hard job to reshape the culture of hockey. And I've heard nothing but positive things coming from those circles. Just a fantastic leader. And so no doubt she could probably report on some negative response to her appointment if we asked her. But I know at least maybe the timing is right. Appointed in 2023, big task on her hands, and she's doing a fantastic job. And as far as I hear, it's because of her success in navigating Curling Canada through some of its challenges that she was the person for the job here. So
yeah, there were a lot of topics that came up during the time that she was with Curling Canada, the CEO of Curling Canada, including the equal pay. And that was a big thing that I think it was a really great opportunity for the women's spokespeople who went forward at that time, knowing that we had a female CEO, like this is the time that we might be able to get this brought to make a change. And so that was great that when she got that all pushed forward while she was there, new rules in place while she was there. So there was a lot that came about that. It was great to have someone there who we felt had our backs in that way. And then, to be able to then move on and try to make those same impacts for hockey, I think, or different ones, not same impactful steps, right. Different things is very cool. So I really think that that's where we're going. I think that there's everything's trending in the right direction. Yeah. That it is one of those areas where there's still this bias that's in a lot of people's heads that women can't do the same things that men can do. And I want to continue to use my voice and like this platform and everything, like on social media, everywhere, just to remind all the young girls out there and the parents of young girls, like, no, we can be just as talented. We can be just as successful. We can do this. We can get past this point in this world right now where they're talking about our appearances and not our skill levels, and where fans feel the need to give their opinion on something that has nothing to do with the sport related thing, or the criticism, like you mentioned, from the Tokyo Olympics being predominantly at women. Like, we can get past this. And I want to, in every way, say that, there have been a lot of steps that are hard, but we like staying strong through all that, and recognizing that we're all trying our hardest to change this. So stay in your sport, and you can achieve things that you didn't even think were possible. Always was a dream to go to the Olympics and to win a Scotties and a world championship. For me, something I thought about all the time, and worked hard enough that it happened. So those accomplishments kind of make all that other stuff feel like nothing, but I know that it was something when it was happening. And so trying to raise as much attention to it as we can so that the next time someone's about to say something about someone's appearance while they're competing in a high level sport, maybe think twice and be like, is that something I would say about a guy? Because I don't think most of the time the answer would be yes. So just as much as we can kind of think twice before doing that, the better. And then for any young girls that might be listening, like I been there, I hear you with all the challenges that we face growing up, and with the feeling like at school you're missing out on things and all that, but just take comfort in the friends that are always there for you and know you're trying to achieve all those big things. Get a good group of friends on your sports teams too, if that's the case, and stick with it, because my best friend is Rachel, because we've played sports together and gone through everything together. She's basically my family. So that comes about, and I maybe would have had a couple more high school friends, but nothing would trump this relationship that I have with her. So don't feel like you're missing out on so much at school that it's not worth it. I can promise you from experience, it very much can be worth it. So don't give up and keep working at it if you love it.
Well said. And I think there's many women out there now who just can get to say, I knew Emma when she was missing all those parties and when she was so committed at a whole different level than all of us. I think they can all look back now and go, wow, I was friends with Emma when we were 12 and 15 and see that. So, no, I think that's a great place to end it, Emma. Love your honesty and the message that you're giving to these young girls and all your fans, and a message to people in positions to influence and to create programs and to invest in programs. Keep doing it for girls and women. Don't back down to some of the challenges that you're faced with. Keep it up, because there's many young girls that are right at that age, 13, 14, facing this staggering dropout rate, and let's keep them in the sport and keep finding opportunities for them.
Yeah, I love that. And you'll always have support, and just keep at it, because if you don't love it, that's different. But if you love something, you can always work through it, and it builds all the tough-ness, and I can promise it's worth it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, again, thanks, Emma, and thanks to everybody for listening this week. It was a great discussion, Emma, as always.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.